On Mount Everest, a climber slips into unconsciousness at 28,000 feet.
I was on the edge of death.
Unable to save him without risking their own lives, his Sherpa guides leave him for dead. But he's still alive.
Suddenly, I was in the real world, on this precipice.
Now he faces the impossible. To survive a freezing night alone, without shelter or oxygen, on the world's highest mountain.
It was so cold. There was a wind swirling around like a hurricane. I thought, well, this is when I'm actually going to die.
Mount Everest, the highest place on Earth. It's the holy grail for mountaineers and a lifelong obsession for Australian climber Lincoln Hall.
My fascination with Everest began in the 1980s. I became so obsessed with climbing that I just kept going as far with it as I could. And that took me to Everest.
In the early hours of the morning, he's going to make a summit attempt. But it won't be his first. 22 years ago, Lincoln got to within 1,500 feet of the summit before conditions became too dangerous and he was forced to abort his climb.
When I got down to the base camp, I was overwhelmed by disappointment. It was almost like a poison. I just couldn't let that happen again.
But now, aged 50, and with a wife and family, Lincoln knows that this is his last chance.
Having a family made a huge difference to Lincoln. Even though this had been his dream for a couple of decades, not coming back wasn't an option.
I just turned 50 and I was nowhere near my strength that I'd had back in my heyday. And I knew that the only way I was going to get through this was through the strength of my mind.
Okay, George, let's go, mate.
It's close to midnight, and Lincoln prepares to leave the pre-summit camp with his Sherpa guides. In front of them lie 1,800 vertical feet and an arduous 9-hour high-altitude climb.
I had a feeling that I was attempting the impossible.
And Lincoln knows that this year alone, 10 climbers have died trying to reach the summit. At a lower camp, Lincoln's close friend and expedition colleague, Mike Dillon, is monitoring his climb.
Lincoln and I had been friends for many years. She was one of the best climbers in Australia and a great friend.
Lincoln's left camp, Mike. Over.
We were expecting to hear, hopefully, good news.
Lincoln is now climbing in what's known as the death zone, an altitude starved of oxygen, where every step is a test of endurance.
Then the ambition starts to come in and the excitement starts to come in and the energy comes in, because this was my big chance. It was wonderful. There were stars everywhere and it just felt like you'd already left the planet.
As dawn breaks, he reaches what's known to climbers as the second step. The biggest obstacle between Lincoln and his dream.
It was just all that joy of the technical part of climbing combined with the world's greatest mountain. And the mountains had started to take shape. We could see the ghostly shape of the summit pyramid. With the summit of Mount Everest within my grasp, the amount of effort I was going to have to put in didn't really matter because I knew I did have that energy within me to get to the summit. Those last steps were really difficult, but I knew I would get there.
Lincoln has made it to the summit of Everest. He's on top of the world.
I could just feel this glow of excitement and of joy. It was just the most wonderful feeling. "25 years since I'd started thinking about Everest, and finally I was here. And just the immensity of the view, the distance that you could see, the curvature of the earth. It was just beautiful.
I was just walking past the communication tent when I heard his voice.
Lincoln, it's Mike, over.
I can't believe we're here.
It was fantastic because Lincoln deserved it more than anybody.
Finally.
He was perfectly calm. It sounded as though he was ringing from the office.
Thanks, guys.
Just remember, though, you're only halfway there, okay? We'll celebrate when you get back, over.
Somebody has to remind you that although it's a beautiful view, get down is a crucial thing, and get down quickly.
When you get to the summit, you're only halfway there. Reaching the summit isn't being a good mountaineer, it's coming back home every time.
Lincoln knows they must descend immediately from the death zone, as no one can survive at this altitude for long.
The death zone has earned its name because it's at a height where your body is literally dying. With the shortage of oxygen, it's very easy to let a little error slip past you, and that can lead to death.
Lincoln and his guides now face a grueling 3-hour descent to get back to the pre-summit camp.
That extra energy that you had from achieving your ambition, suddenly you don't have that ambition and you're just filled with tiredness. Suddenly, I just felt exhausted. Then I became overwhelmed with lethargy. snow.
Suffering from a severe form of altitude sickness, oxygen starvation is causing blood vessels to leak fluid into Lincoln's brain.
I couldn't live in this oxygen-starved environment for very long at all.
If he doesn't get up and get down the mountain fast, he'll die.
I just don't know what happened.
Okay. Direct to base camp.
Dosha, this is Mike from base camp, over.
Lincoln is down. He's barely breathing.
At base camp, Lincoln's friend Mike Dillon knows this is desperate news. Lincoln is suffering from severe altitude sickness, or cerebral edema.
We started to be very worried because when you get cerebral edema at that height, it's very unlikely that you'll live.
Pressure is being put onto your brain. There's nowhere for that pressure to go. So it makes you go delirious and you die.
Is he talking? Is he making any sense? Over.
Negative.
Cerebral edema can kill people instantly, but we knew that sometimes it can take a little while.
Close to the summit of Mount Everest, it's impossible to bring Lincoln down.
No one has the physical strength to carry anyone down from that height.
Lincoln.
Helicopters can rescue you from ships, from being lost in the bush. You can be rescued from the water, but you can't be rescued from the summit of Mount Everest.
Over decades, more than 200 people have been left for dead near the summit of Everest.
Suddenly, I was back
Lincoln.
in a sort of, I wouldn't say lucid state,
Breathe.
but I actually realized where I was. I was on Mount Everest.
He's getting up now. He's getting up.
Good work, Dosha.
I was lucid enough to realize that I really had to get down as quickly as I could.
But the fluid, causing pressure on his brain, is now leading to a dangerous loss of physical control.
I was going incredibly slowly. I could hardly walk. I was just so weak. Everything was difficult. I would tell my legs to move and they wouldn't. And I'd force them to move and I'd take the other leg and do the same thing. It was my mind that was driving me forward.
Somehow, Lincoln manages to make it back to the second step. But this means rappelling down a sheer rock face at 28,000 feet above sea level.
That's the dangerous place. It's a make or break it point, and often it's a place where people die.
And Lincoln's mental state is getting worse.
I was in a trance. I was just incredibly confused.
Another Sherpa is at the second step.
And I wondered what he was doing there.
A climber that he was guiding to the summit has died just below them. Already confused, the news pushes Lincoln over the edge.
It was such a shock that I fell to pieces. It was me battling the Sherpas. I was really on the very edge. was an 11,000-foot drop. That's where I wanted to jump. I was trying to jump off the face. I had gone delirious.
Dorje to base camp. Do you read me? Over.
His guide radios Lincoln's close friend Mike Dillon at base camp for help.
Put the radio to Lincoln's ear. I want to talk to him. Okay, Lincoln, mate, it's Mike.
Can you hear me? It's Mike.
We were his friends, we spoke his language. Even though his mind was obviously irrational, we thought that we might be able to help.
Lincoln, you've got to get up.
Mike is Lincoln's only hope. The Sherpas can't carry him down. But staying with Lincoln at this altitude could kill them too. If Lincoln doesn't get up, he'll be left to die.
Lincoln, Mike, hear me? Get up, get up.
Come on, mate, get up.
Suddenly I could hear an English voice,
You have to keep going, all right?
but it was Michael Dillon begging me to come down.
Lincoln, listen.
To me. Come on, Lincoln.
Lincoln, you have to help the Sherpas.
To help you. Get up, mate. Come on, get up.
And that managed to get through to me, and suddenly
We're coming down.
I was back.
He's getting up now. He's getting up.
But now Lincoln must rappel down the treacherous second step. And this time, he's on his own.
And I needed to descend that using a rope, and there was a ladder. I started going down the rope.
Lincoln!
I managed to get halfway down. And then I started hearing voices. And suddenly, I became incredibly frightened. I just panicked. I was just incredibly scared. My immediate thought was that I'm going to die.
Lincoln loses consciousness again, suspended at 28,000 feet.
And then
Lincoln, listen to me. Your mind is not
Hey, Dylan. Happy birthday, mate.
I was hallucinating.
Change your way. Change your way.
There was sort of a silence. But suddenly, everything was wonderful. This amazing view. I forgot about everything else. I just started to feel this joy at this wonderful mountain scene with the warm colours of the late afternoon on the snow. When I realised where I was,
I'm here. We must go down.
pulsing with adrenaline, I rappelled down.
Against the odds, Lincoln makes it down.
And I just felt incredibly relieved.
Go!
Sherpas took advantage of the fact that suddenly I was re-energised, and they kept at me.
Move! Move!
They just kept telling me to keep moving, keep moving, keep moving.
But vital time has been lost. And at this altitude, every second counts.
We knew that they'd run out of oxygen by now. We knew that meant all the effort of trying to get Lincoln to come down was exhausting everyone. It was probably the key factor that was going to kill Lincoln.
As the Sherpas desperately try to push Lincoln on, disaster strikes again.
I collapsed in exhaustion. I just had no energy. And I was able to move no further. I was actually felt quite pleased to lie there.
Lincoln, keep breathing. Breathe.
Dorsal to base camp. Lincoln is down again.
He was breathing very slowly and he was in a very bad way.
Lincoln.
He's lost all heart and hope, they put it like that. I remember thinking, he's a goner.
Lincoln. Lincoln.
The Sherpas put their finger into Lincoln's eye and he didn't respond at all, so he was in a comatose state. We knew that Lincoln wouldn't live because if you've got cerebral edema, you've been without oxygen and you're that high on Everest, no one has survived.
To be realistic, we have like zero chance of getting him down. If the Sherpas stay up there, they could all die.
The Sherpas had put in superhuman efforts, but we had to realise that there was some point where someone would have to make the decision that to save their lives, we would have to tell them to leave Lincoln and head down themselves.
The Sherpas say a prayer and collect Lincoln's belongings to return to his family. Lincoln Hall is left for dead. Back at base camp, Mike Dillon has just received the news. His close friend is dead.
We were in shock. We didn't quite know what to do next. But we did know we had to tell Lincoln's wife, Barbara.
Hello?
Hi, Barbara. It's Mike. Look, I've got some bad news. Lincoln passed away about 20 minutes ago.
I just felt an incredible hollowness, as though really part of me had died as well.
I'm so sorry.
I just felt just numb. I just felt completely numb and hollow.
When it finally reached its ultimate conclusion that he's dead, then it's still a dreadful shock.
3 hours after being left to die, Lincoln emerges from his comatose state.
I felt completely disoriented. I was exhausted, dehydrated. I'd been left for dead, and I was still there. I was still alive. I very carefully looked for my pack, which had some really useful things like a warm thermos and a headlamp and some extra clothing.
But the pack has gone. Lincoln's guides have taken all of his gear to return to his loved ones.
My immediate thought was that I'm going to die. Having been left for dead with no shelter and no oxygen, how could I possibly survive up here?
Night falls on Mount Everest. And Mike Dillon has no idea his best friend is still alive.
I had to go to Lincoln's tent and pack up all his belongings, report to the authorities that he died. We hadn't really taken in Lincoln's death, really, to be honest. Your brain can't process this kind of information.
As the night wears on, the temperature plummets to minus 25 degrees.
It was so cold. There was a wind swirling around like a hurricane.
Exposed near the summit, Lincoln is now at serious risk of hypothermia. If he falls asleep, he will drift back into a coma and quickly freeze to death.
Staying alive meant staying awake. I kept telling myself, just stay awake, just stay awake. My mind was ready just to drift off into nothingness, into the warmth of imminent hypothermia. But I just couldn't let that happen. So I rocked my body in a sort of circular motion.
As the hours go by and the temperature drops further, Lincoln doubts he'll make it through the night.
My family's back home, and there's this aura of death.
As Lincoln barely clings to life, his grieving wife and sons are back in Australia.
Eventually, I fell asleep and I had a dream that I could see Lincoln walking towards me very, very clearly. And he was smiling. And it was such a lovely vision. I just woke up full of joy that he was coming back. And then the awful truth hit me. I just felt incredibly cold and numb. And I could hear, especially our oldest son, crying himself to sleep.
By the early hours, Lincoln is losing the battle to stay alive.
I was so cold. I couldn't feel a thing. And then I realised, with horror, what I wasn't feeling. What I wasn't feeling was my fingers. And I recognised the wooden feeling of frostbitten fingers. My fingers were frozen solid.
But frostbite is not the only sign that hypothermia has now taken a deadly hold.
I felt too hot, and I began undressing.
Feeling too hot is a symptom of advanced hypothermia and a sign that Lincoln is close to death.
It was the beginning of the end.
At camp,
The Lincoln Hall.
Lincoln's friends pay tribute to him.
Lincoln.
Hundreds of people have died on Everest, but we thought it was never going to happen to Lincoln.
I had an hallucination where I was wearing a really warm and comforting cloak. But that cloak was the warmth and the welcoming of my imminent death. And I thought, well, this is when I'm actually going to die. And then I had horrible, horrible recognition of the fact that I would not ever see my family again. I could not accept that. Because if I died, my family would be destroyed.
I love you, Barbara.
Love was the overriding emotion.
Having a great birthday, mate.
I couldn't wear the cloak of death. I had to find a way out. I had to come back to my family.
It's been 12 hours since Lincoln Hall's lifeless body was left to die. Incredibly, he's still alive. But alone, near the summit of Mount Everest, he's barely clinging on to life.
The earth was beneath my feet, and I thought, that can't be right. That can't possibly be right. This huge mountain can't be moving. Therefore, I must be on a boat. was so contained in that bizarre world of hallucinations and loneliness and cold and death. I didn't know where I was. I knew someone was there. It was all very confusing because I'd been living in a very intense world of being alone and coping with that, and suddenly there were other people who'd come from somewhere.
Leading one of the very last climbing parties of the season, Everest guide Dan Mazur has found Lincoln by chance.
That was actually the last day that there was anyone else on the mountain. Those 4 final climbers would have been expecting to step over my dead body.
You tell me, man. He had this really kind of wide-eyed, very gaunt look in his face. He was not in good shape, you know, and 28,000 feet, you know, the human body is very fragile.
Severely hypothermic and delirious from the swelling in his brain. It may already be too late to save Lincoln.
He kept looking at us and saying, "Oh, this is a brilliant boat ride we're on. What a brilliant weather for a cruise."
Just lie down. Lie down.
Dan recognizes the deadly symptoms of cerebral edema. He gives Lincoln oxygen to help alleviate the pressure from his brain, and chocolate to raise his blood sugar levels.
Suddenly, I was in the real world. I just didn't remember what happened.
Lincoln is pulled back from the brink of death.
Stand to sir. On 7 Summit. Team. Over.
This is 7 Summit, stand, go ahead, over. We suddenly heard a guide's voice come on the radio.
You have somebody called Lincoln Hall with your team.
Lincoln died? He died last night. Over.
He's alive.
You're kidding me.
It was pretty amazing. We were still in a state of shock. We hadn't really taken in Lincoln's death, really, to be honest. And now we had this extra news to take in that Lincoln wasn't dead.
A team of Sherpas is quickly mobilized to rescue Lincoln. But they are 4 hours away. And Lincoln has already slipped back into a delirious state.
You can slip away into unconsciousness and coma and death extremely rapidly up there.
I was hallucinating madly.
He turns on those trying to save him.
He fought us. He took off his oxygen mask, he ripped it off.
Something here.
I was trying to go back up the mountain. In fact, I was on the edge of death.
Finally, 2 Sherpas arrive from camp to try and bring him down. Already exhausted from a 4-hour ascent, Lincoln's life is now in their hands.
The Sherpas had no idea of how fragile I was. I could only get half a dozen steps. Before I had to collapse in the snow.
The Sherpas must now get Lincoln down 7,000 feet. Three hours since the Sherpas reached Lincoln, and Mike Dillon is getting anxious.
Lincoln was in a bad way. He was alive, but we didn't quite know whether he was going to ultimately survive. We thought he had a 50% chance of making it.
And as another night falls, Lincoln's progress is painfully slow. The Sherpas know that their lives are now on the line.
I was saying we have to go more slowly.
Move! Go!
And they were saying, no, you have to go fast.
They push Lincoln hard.
Keep going!
They were prepared to do anything to get me off the mountain.
I said go!
I could tell from the tone of their voices that they were tired and exhausted and they didn't want to be there.
Move! Get up!
One of them went to hit me with his ice axe. They were prepared to do anything to get me off the mountain.
I said up! Go! Go! Keep going!
10 hours since the start of the rescue, Lincoln is losing his battle with hypothermia and cerebral edema. Lincoln finally gives up.
I was able to go no further.
Leave. Just leave.
Barely conscious, the Sherpas push Lincoln on.
And the only thing I could do was just to hold on to my commitment to find a way through this.
Get up!
I just had to be able to keep walking to stay alive. But I was going to do it. I was going to get back so I could get home.
We're close, Lincoln. We're close.
I came around a slight crest in the slope. And I thought, this is it. I'm going to survive. was just a flood of relief. But I didn't have any energy left for jubilation.
Hello?
Oh,
Lincoln?
Lincoln's voice was so hoarse, I couldn't believe it was him.
it's okay.
She knew it was me. And that was just the most wonderful moment.
It's okay, baby. I'm okay, I'm fine. I love you too.
I came so close to destroying the family that I loved so much that I vowed that I would never let anything like this ever happen again.
At great personal risk, the Sherpas saved Lincoln's life.
I really wanted them to know that they'd saved my life and that I would be forever grateful.
Lincoln recovered, but lost the tips of his fingers and a toe to frostbite. He still rock climbs, but has no plans to attempt any more major peaks. Doctors have yet to understand how he survived so long, with so little oxygen and without shelter, in Everest's death zone.